keys to a win over Green Bay tonight. The Packers minus 3.5 pretty much in most places. I see some threes out there, but mostly 3.5s. And the total's 48.5, pretty much the highest total on the board for the week 2 games. Jacksonville, Cincinnati's right there at 48 as well. All right, number 1, Washington beats Green Bay tonight at Lambeau if they can make the Packers one-dimensional on offense. By the way, the first several keys, like they were against the Giants on Sunday, for me, it's going to be a lot about the defense more so than the offense. Why? Because I have a lot of confidence in the offense. I do, even against good defensive teams. But there are a few things that I will mention. But these first few keys are Washington's defense against Green Bay's offense. And number 1, you've got to make Green Bay one-dimensional offensively. It's hard to do because Matt LaFleur is a very good offensive head coach. He's a very good play caller. And you know what? The last time he faced off against Dan Quinn, that playoff game in Dallas in January of 2024, this was the game that basically disqualified Dan Quinn for many of you from being our team's next head coach. The Packers destroyed Dallas on that day, 48-32. They ran it all over them. They threw it all over them. Had Quinn and that defense off balance the entire game. Running the football, play action, throwing it. Love was great. Aaron Jones was great. They were dominant up front. And LaFleur has had Quinn in his matchups as a head coach in Green Bay off balance a lot. 3 times, 3 meetings between LaFleur as the head coach in Green Bay and Quinn as either the head coach in Atlanta or the defensive coordinator in Dallas. The Packers with LaFleur won all 3 of those games and on offense averaged 36 points per game and 424 yards per game. Why? Well, some of those defenses in Dallas and in Atlanta were a bit predictable. A lot of cover 1, a lot of cover 3. And LaFleur's really good. And they had, by the way, for 2 of those 3 meetings, Aaron Rodgers in MVP seasons. So that makes a difference as well. All right. But tonight, if Green Bay is able to run the football and use play action and stay out of 3rd and longs or just 3rd downs in general, Washington's offense will have to win the game. They'll have to score 28 plus to have a chance. We said this a lot last year, going into games that, unless the defense steps up, it's going to have to be Jaden and that offense that somehow scores enough to win and plays well enough to win. And, making Green Bay one-dimensional starts with stopping the run, which is something Washington did very well on Sunday against the Giants. But the Packers are not the Giants, guys. Early season or not, their offensive line injuries are going to be a big issue tonight, as I mentioned in the last segment. If those 2 guys play and they're healthy, it's a very good offensive line. If they don't play, they're questionable. I don't know what that line would be. They dominated the Lions, including Aiden Hutchinson on Sunday. But the bottom line for Washington defensively, you can't let Matt LaFleur get this defense off balance with the running game with Josh Jacobs and then with the weapons they have, because they have a lot of them. Maybe not elite weapons, but they have a lot of them. Number 2, Washington beats Green Bay if they can get pressure with 4. Miller, Luvu on the outside, Payne and Armstrong on the inside, maybe Kinlaw for Payne. We saw that on 1 3rd and long, but basically their 3rd and obvious passing on Sunday against the Giants. Payne, Armstrong inside, Luvu, Miller on the outside, plenty of movement, plenty of stunts, no 3-point stances. It was, easy against the Giants. But they've got to be able to pressure with 4, because I worry that if they have to send a +1, which they didn't have to do last week against New York very often, then Love is really capable of picking them apart. You guys, Jordan Love can throw the football. He processes quickly. He can get it out quickly. He is accurate. He can go downfield quickly. He can hit the check down quickly. He throws over the middle. He can throw outs. This guy's really good. You give him time, and you've got a defense that's on its heels because of their balance. It could be a long night defensively. It could be. I have more belief already after one game in the defense. Trust me, I do. I have more belief in the secondary compared to last year. I do. But the Packers have a ton of options. I mentioned this yesterday. Jordan Love was 16 of 22, just 16 completions against the Lions. He didn't have to throw it more because the game was over when it got to the fourth quarter. But he threw 16 completions in the game to 10 different receivers. That's crazy. That's almost impossible to do. He completed passes to 8 different guys in the first quarter alone. I've talked about Dobbs and Wicks and Reed. Tucker Kraft, their tight end. Tough matchup. If you got to go with more than 4 to get pressure on Jordan Love, and Detroit didn't get much pressure on Jordan Love, then I fear for the coverage on the back end. And I think that Love and LaFleur have answers for pressure. And I think somebody's going to be open. And they've got speed. They've got size. They've got good route runners. Get pressure on Love when he's got to throw with 4. The O-line injuries, again, could be a factor tonight. Could be a major plus for Washington. So Washington beats Green Bay if they keep Green Bay one-dimensional, make Green Bay one-dimensional, and if they can get pressure with 4. Number 3, they beat Green Bay if they're able to play like the same amount of base defense that they played in the opener. What was great about Sunday, and we talked about this, I think, on Tuesday, is that they have more defensive linemen, better defensive linemen, and depth along the defensive front. So you'd like to see those players play a lot more and more of them be on the field. Their base defense is a 4-3, even though they have had some base defense first down looks that look more like a 3-4 or even a 5-man front. But there are a lot of defensive linemen in the game. Wise, Armstrong, Kinlaw, Payne, Jacob Martin, they're all in the football game. And they've got Kinlaw and Payne playing. They're playing them in different spots, too. We went through, all of the different places that Armstrong played and Payne played the other day. They've got versatility. They're certainly confident in their versatility. So it'd be nice to see Green Bay say, hey, we're going to try to run the football in 12 personnel, and, in 12 personnel, you can be in base more. You can be in your base 4-3. Last year, remember, they played a lot of nickel. It's one of the reasons they were not a good run-stopping team. You're typically not nearly as good stopping the run with 5 DBs on the field versus 4 defensive linemen and 4 DBs on the field. I want the bulk on the field tonight. I want to see the size up front. I want to see, less nickel, more base like we did last week, but didn't last year. I'd love to see some of these 5-man fronts. I'd love to see the penetration. But I don't know that you get that. You get that against the run if you're in nickel too much. So one of those things to watch, does Green Bay play a lot of 12 personnel, a lot of 2 tight ends? Is Washington able to play their base defense a lot more than they did last year and more like what they did last week? Because it worked last week. They were excellent last week. Again, the Giants, that quarterback was terrible. Tonight, the Packers and that quarterback much better. But if they can often be in something resembling base for them a lot more than they were last year, I think that's it. I think that's to Washington's advantage this year because they've got better D linemen and more of them. Number 4, Washington beats Green Bay if they don't give up the big play. Green Bay may not have an elite wide receiver, okay, but they've got so many of them. By the way, the tight end's a big threat. The running back is a threat. But, Savion Williams, their 3rd rounder, Matthew Golden, their 1st rounder. Matthew Golden runs a 4.2. Wicks and Dobbs and Reed is crafty and has great speed and great quickness. You can't give up the big play here, especially the big play for a score, because I think the red zone, and I'll get to that, will have a big part in tonight's outcome. But giving up the big play, especially if you end up having to send 5 to get pressure on 3rd and 4 or on 2nd and 7 or 2nd and 8, 2nd and 9. I don't know. I love what I saw in the first week, but I also was very impressed with what Green Bay is capable of doing. Again, I've mentioned everything defensively. Offensively, just a couple of keys real quickly. Number one is Green Bay. Let me just mention their defense is really talented too, especially with the addition of Parsons. But I mentioned Lucas Van Ness yesterday. He's a load. He's the guy, remember, if I didn't mention this yesterday, in the 2023 draft that I think Washington wanted to trade up and select. Remember, they were on there was that video with Martin Mayhew talking to New England about maybe moving up, and then Pittsburgh ended up pulling the trigger and trading up. But Washington closed off that conversation once Van Ness got picked right before New England was going to pick. And then New England dealt with Pittsburgh, let Pittsburgh come up to take the lineman. And they moved back behind Washington because obviously they thought Washington was going to take Emmanuel Forbes and they thought they could get Christian Gonzalez there. But Lucas Van Ness is a player. And Rashawn Gary can play. And now they've got Parsons. They got this guy Cooper who is nasty. Number 56, all right, as a linebacker. So they've got a good defense. With that said, there isn't any defense that I think our offense can't move the football on and score. They proved that against Philadelphia's vaunted defense December of last year. Turned it over 5 times, still scored 36 points. Hell, they proved it in the NFC Championship game against the best defense in football. They moved the ball up and down the field. They just turned it over 4 times. I'm not saying some of those turnovers weren't forced and that they weren't, one of them was on special teams, but they still moved the football a hell of a lot more than Kansas City did in the Super Bowl. I don't fear any really good defensive team with number 5 on the field and with what we think is an improved offensive line, what we think is an added major weapon in Debo, year 2. I just think, when you have an offense, right, that, can stretch the field vertically, horizontally, the way Cliff does, can, even more so now with Debo Samuel, has a quarterback who is involved in the run game, has a ton of backfield motions. I mean, some of the stuff we watched. And by the way, has to dictate to the defense, oh, by the way, you've got to take one of your 11 and use that guy as a spy on the quarterback. Remember, it was the Atlanta game, I think the Atlanta game, where they had 2 spies. Raheem Morris used 2 spies on Jaden. So I just feel like offensively, we're always capable of going down the field against anybody, even a good defense, and scoring. But a couple of things. One, you got to know where Micah Parsons is when he's on the field. And you can't let what happened last week. I mean, Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, they got a couple of quick, easy rushes against Tunsil and Connerly Jr. You don't want that. Even though Jaden's capable of making, a quick and effective pass rush, look silly ultimately with his playmaking ability. You don't want that. You'd like him to be able to drop back and throw from a clean pocket. The other thing, too, is I was thinking about this more and more this week. And Joe didn't seem to think, Joe Theismann yesterday, that what I thought Jaden took too many hits on Sunday. And I thought some of them were unnecessary. He had that read option keeper, which actually probably was the wrong decision early in the game, and he got tackled awkwardly. He could have gotten to the sideline, and instead of getting 5 yards on first down, gotten 4, without the contact. The quarterback counter, he could have gotten down. The quarterback draws, he could have gotten down. I'd like to see him in this game because they've got some headhunters out there, and they've got some speed. I'd like to see him protect himself. This is a long haul. And Jeff Hafley, we had the Green Bay guy on yesterday, He thinks that this year is going to be much more of an aggressive year from Green Bay's defense. I would actually be surprised if they spend a lot of time and a lot of players coming after Jaden. I think the way to play Washington defensively is bend, don't break, and then try to, get the stops in the red zone. That leads me to this. Red zone will be crucial tonight. Washington wins if they come out on the plus side of the red zone equation, meaning, you got to be 3 of 4, 3 of 5 in the red zone tonight. And you got to hold them to 1 of 3 or 2 of 5 because the team that kicks more field goals in this game loses in the red zone, because I believe we're going to see both teams have success moving the football. I think the biggest surprise to me, although Thursday night games are wild cards, you never know, but it would be a 13-10 low scoring game with, 12 punts, 13 punts, 14 punts. That would surprise me. I think both teams have the potential to move the football tonight. And then here are a couple of other things. Obviously, you got to play a cleaner game than you did Sunday. Fewer penalties, no drop passes, better timeout usage. All the things that I said would have led to, a problematic situation against a better team, but didn't hurt them against the Giants. Turnovers are always big in games like this. And the kickers, it could come down to the kickers. Brandon McManus is 23 of 24 as a Packers kicker, including 2 for 2 last week against Detroit. And Matt Gay, we saw in the preseason, there are reasons to wonder. He has not attempted a field goal yet. He might have to tonight. Really good matchup, though. I'll have my prediction a little bit later on in the show with Max having his as well. But if the Thursday night quick turnaround, health, injuries don't play a major factor in this game, this should be a really fun and good football game between two, I think, really good teams.